Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for choosing to spend literally any of your day with me. I've been walking around. This is a little bit of sensory overload, so I know that you had a lot of options, and I very much appreciate you choosing to exercise one of those options here with me today. We are on a very tight time frame, so I'm going to trust my robot overlord to keep time for me, and we'll get going right away. So inappropriately large picture of my face and some of my contact information. Wow, I'm jumping right to content right away. My contact information is down at the bottom. Social media platforms are the little box that my dopamine comes out of, so please do contact me on either Instagram or LinkedIn. Always happy to talk about content design or content strategy or epic travel destinations, as that is essentially my entire personality is traveling around the world. I am based in London, though as I'm sure you can tell from my accent, I am not from here. I've been here for about 3 years, and I have developed a deep and abiding love of salt and vinegar crisps. I do, unfortunately, still compliment people on their pants rather than their trousers in public sometimes. It is a work in progress. So let's jump straight into what we came to talk about today, which is atomic content design and how I think that this approach can really help you and your content teams benefit from the structure. I want to talk a little bit first about this incredibly wonderful trend that I'm seeing in content marketing and that I've been seeing in content creation for several years, which is where we stop creating content specifically because we were told we need to create content. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because it's a little early in the morning for that, but I would like to just ask you to think about, if you are a content creator, how many times in the last year you've gotten an email that started with the words, "We need some content for X." And you say, "That's fantastic, I'm so glad that you're thinking about that. What kind of content are you thinking of?" And you get back "Oh, I don't know. We need content. We need content because that's how we personalize, that's how we drive the engine of our digital experiences." And all of that is true, but it isn't so much about creating more content. Because just creating more content isn't going to create the kind of emotional response, build the kind of trust with our audiences that we're striving to. We need to be thinking about creating the right content. And that's why I find these statistics so encouraging, because marketers are now citing creating the right content as one of their primary challenges. They're also thinking about how they can optimize that content and citing that. How do we optimize for search? Rather than just continually talking about creating more content. Because, and I know this is going to come as a shock to you, especially after the last couple of minutes, but it's not about creating more content. It's about creating the right content. Creating the content that is going to resonate with your audience. You can absolutely throw content spaghetti at the wall over and over and over again, and eventually some of it will stick. But it's a much better strategy to think about creating the right content for your audience, for the channel right from the beginning. Now I realize that that is not particularly helpful advice. And the reason that that's not particularly helpful is that content creation is hard. I thought we'd just start with the truth and see how we go. It's incredibly hard to create content. It's hard from just a logistical perspective, because the first thing you need is someone who knows what they're talking about, so you need a subject matter expert. And then you need someone who can write that subject matter down. Now, ideally, those are the same person, but not always. So you need a subject matter expert, you need someone who can write it down, then you have to send all of your content through what I call the polishing process, which includes editing for copy edits, making sure that it matches with your tone of voice, folding it into the larger content strategy. Then you have to publish it, and then you have to start the whole conversation over again with the next piece of content. You may notice that the things I've mentioned, they don't talk about any of the stuff that I have up here, because this is all the extra stuff. That's just the logistics. You also, thinking about the changing tastes of your audience, and I'm here to tell you, if you are chasing changing tastes, you will not have time for anything else. That is a full-time job. Thinking about the rapidly evolving technological platforms that enable not only content creation, but content optimization, making sure that those are folded in at the right time. And none of that takes into account the moment that your boss is going to look at you and say, "Yeah, but how do we know that it's working?" It can be very difficult to measure on a one-to-one level how a piece of content created a dollar amount for the company. Not impossible. If you have a robust attribution model, number one, good for you, you're well ahead, that's a good thing. Having success metrics in place from the beginning can definitely help, but it can be difficult to attach a metric to establishing trust with your audience. How do you measure that? I'm really asking, I don't know. Let's talk really quickly about what every piece of content should be. I want to be very clear at the beginning, this is not mine. I added the graphics, I put it on this slide, but all of this comes from the Creating Valuable Content checklist from the Content Marketing Institute. I have it on a Post-it, and I check it 3 times a week. What you need to make sure, every piece of content needs to be findable. You want the robots to be able to find it, as well as the people who are looking for it. You want to make sure that you're creating content that exists within the context of what you're talking about, that is respectful of the reader's time, that provides value. You also want to make sure that it's actionable, that there's something very clear for that person to do next after they've consumed this piece of content. And you want to make sure that it's shareable. So that's an awful lot of things to do. This is all the sort of technological steps, making sure that they're ready and with you on this journey. And that means thinking much more strategically about your content. It means valuing it as a business asset rather than the afterthought that it sometimes becomes, especially in enterprise markets. Getting people working on the right things is incredibly exciting. Taking advantage of the technology that you already have in your stack, improving your content operations process to make sure that you are, again, treating content as a valuable business asset. If you take only one thing away from this presentation, I hope it will be that content is an asset. It is something that you can build within your company. You can build up a process that will allow you to take full and complete advantage of the value that this kind of asset provides. I do believe that content creation is a creative endeavor at its heart. So what my goal always is to help my team, to help our clients, bring the creative process together with the operational process so that we can not only continue to allow our content creators to create the kinds of things that they enjoy, but also make sure that we're benefiting the business overall long term. Intelligent content is not a new idea. I've traced it to about 2011, but it's very hard to say if that's when the idea first was created or if that's just when it showed up on the internet. Intelligent content involves a strategic approach, yes. It also places the customer at the absolute center of the conversation. Again, it talks about using content as a business asset by structuring it for discovery and reuse on multiple channels, and emphasizing an approach that means that content can be found when it's needed and used in different forms to extend its life and its usefulness. And this brings me to atomic content, because intelligent content is sort of the philosophy, right? That sits over the top of everything that we're talking about. Intelligent content is the approach. Atomic content is the execution. This is what you can do to continue, again, to evolve your content as a business asset and to make sure that you're getting the most out of every piece of content that you create. Ideally, and for those of you who were at the previous presentation where they talked about accessibility, this is also very good for accessibility. Ideally, all of this is going to be covered by your metadata, because content is essentially no good to anyone if your team can't find it, doesn't know if they're allowed to use it, and isn't sure where it belongs. You can have the best content organizational system in the world, and it's very easy for it to just become the last scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, where there's just rows of brown crates, and they're all identical, and they all just have a number, and no one can tell what's inside, no one can tell how they're supposed to use it, and that would be if they could find what they were looking for in the first place, which they wouldn't be able to in this wonderful analogy that I've come up with. What's really great is that content teams are already moving in this direction. And the reason is because we're all tired. We're all exhausted. It takes a lot of effort to continually produce content for brands. And if you've put as much money and time and thought into a hero asset as you should, and as you probably are, it makes absolutely no sense not to continue to reuse that on other platforms and continue to extend the life cycle of that content for as long as possible. Recycling content by taking this atomic approach where you can combine things in different ways to keep it fresh is an excellent way to save time, save money, and increase the ROI of every piece of content that comes through your team. And because this is already such a big part of most marketing approaches, that makes it much easier to give it a name and start to operationalize it, because you've already got people moving in this direction. I would be willing to bet, actually I don't carry cash anymore, so I'm not sure how much money is in my wallet, but I would be willing to bet whatever is in my wallet that there's at least one person on your content team who already thinks about their content this way. And that's because incredibly tight turnarounds, incredible waves of content demand have led most if not all of us to think about content in a slightly different way. How can we continue to reinforce the message while also delivering on what the business expects? I've got another metaphor for you, don't worry. Atomic content at its core is structured for retrieval and reuse. I have seen this called modular content as well. It's the same thing. If you see atomic content, if you see modular content, whatever term you prefer, honestly, live your life. I'm here for you, I'm here for your choice. It's the exact same thing. What it essentially means is taking, again, pieces of content, and I cannot emphasize enough that this doesn't mean they need to be small, just individual pieces of content and being ready to combine them in different ways to create that engagement across different channels. This takes a lot less effort in the long term, and it's great for those of us who are responsible. If you're responsible for creating personalized experiences on your website, if you're responsible for social media content for your brand, if you touch either of those things at any time, and perhaps most especially if you build web pages for your brand, this approach is going to save you time, energy, and money in the long run. Somebody's going to come to me and ask me to put money on that as well. I'm willing to. All right, this is the second metaphor that I promised you. I love Great British Bake Off with an unholy love, so it is very helpful for me to think of these pieces of content as ingredients in a recipe that you're putting together. If you like to cook or bake, or you like to watch people cook or bake, you can see how this starts to make sense. You're taking these clearly defined individual pieces and you're putting them together in a different way to make something new, but that is also identifiably related to the source material. Again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to remember they don't have to be small. It's one of the reasons that I do tend to prefer the term modular content to the term atomic content, all evidence to the contrary, since atomic content is all over this presentation. But when I say atomic content, people tend to think of, understandably, atoms, which are incredibly tiny. It doesn't have to be tiny. What it does have to be, and oh, yep, there you go, modular content. You can see I've mixed and matched already. What it does have to be is something that is small enough to fit in multiple places, but is large enough to stand on its own. That's really what we're thinking about. It needs to be, I've completely forgotten the word, adaptable, that's the word. It needs to be adaptable for different audiences and different channels. That's the whole point of taking an atomic approach to your content, is that you can spread it out to multiple different places and engage with people on the platforms where they are, whether that's your customers, your visitors, your employees, making sure that you're reaching them where they are with the content they need when they need it. Okay, I wasn't sure I was going to talk about this because generative AI is something that I do feel personally very passionate about when it comes to content creation. I have a lot of thoughts. I also have a really wonderful reputation in my company. I'm the fun police. I'm the person in every meeting after someone has presented this wonderful platform, this great idea that they have. I'm the person who says, that sounds awesome. How are we going to do that? Who does that benefit? What value are we expecting to get out of it? And I think that there's a lot of power in generative AI, and I'm not saying that just because there's about 7 different AI platforms within hearing distance of this booth. I do think there's a lot of power in it. I also think this is a Spider-Man moment, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And that's what I want everyone to think about when they think about integrating AI, especially generative AI, into their tech stack. I've seen wildly differing stats on how many marketers are using generative AI. This 72% figure came from a survey that the Content Marketing Institute did a year ago. I really thought that when I started doing research, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of an old stat, I probably need something new. I really thought that number would have gone up. What was interesting is I found that number's actually gone down, according to some studies. So Salesforce put out a study in June that showed that 51% of marketers are using generative AI, and 22% intend to use it soon, which I think, as anybody who's ever developed a website knows, soon can mean anything between next week and the day I die, should nothing happen in the intervening time to prevent me from using it. So soon is a very subjective metric. My personal opinion is that we are still a little bit on the line between generative AI being a toy and generative AI being a tool. It wasn't that long ago, in fact I checked, that's how inactive I sometimes am on LinkedIn, I was able to actually go back and see the posts I'd liked, where it was not even a year ago that so many of my colleagues were saying, hey, look at this, I asked ChatGPT to do a sales pitch in the style of a Taylor Swift song, isn't this funny, isn't this fun? And it was funny, and it was fun, because that's what a toy is. A toy is funny, and a toy is fun, and a toy is to be enjoyed. When you start integrating a tool into your tech stack, there are different rules. Then we have to think about how are we going to govern AI usage in our stack? How are we going to be transparent about where AI is used, especially when it comes to content and image creation? There are a lot of reasons that marketers have cited for not using generative AI. They've got actually, I didn't write down the numbers, I wish I had, but several of them were accuracy concerns, copyright concerns. My personal favorite was corporate mandates. There are actually companies that have said, we're not using generative AI until we understand what the implications are. I'm not saying don't use it. I use it. I think most of you probably have used it. What I'm saying is we need to be deliberate and careful about how we use it. So these are sort of my general thoughts about content creation and generative AI. You probably know why you want to use it. That's probably very clear to you. Make sure there's a good reason. Make sure there's a good business reason. What value does it bring? How will it help you specifically? How will it help your teams? How will it help your customers? I don't personally consider everyone else is doing it to be a good business reason, but I do think that everyone else is doing it can spark a genuine conversation about where it fits in your tech stack and how you should be using it. Understand that there are those ethical concerns and biases. Everyone here looks very smart. I'm sure that all of you are well aware of the environmental impact of using generative AI, also aware of the data horizon that is rapidly approaching with generative AI tools. Be aware of the biases that can surface. Human beings are imperfect, and we're the ones who built these models, which means that we brought our biases with us when we did it. So be aware that these tools are not perfect, and think about implementing a framework, a consistent framework for governing generative AI use. Something in my team we've talked about a lot. At what stage of the content creation process should we be using Gen AI? Are we allowed to use Gen AI? How do we acknowledge that we've done it when we've done it? Thinking about all of those things, if you don't already have sort of a committee or a tiger team that is responsible for thinking about generative AI, I would definitely suggest that you do that as a brand. It's not going anywhere. It's going to be an increasingly large part of the conversation as we move forward. Again, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying consider how it will benefit you specifically and your team specifically. This is one of my favorite quotes ever. I think in marketing and in business in general, we do tend to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So here are things to think about when you're thinking about atomic content, when you're thinking about generative AI use, how you can loop all of that into the process. focus on the customer. If you keep the customer and their needs and the problems that they're trying to solve at the center of the conversation, customers are watching how brands speak to them, and you know that because you are a customer. I'm a customer, we're all customers. Think about what you like to see from a brand. How do you like a brand to interact with you? Moving that to the forefront of the conversation, keeping that at the center of every piece of content that you create is the absolute best thing that any brand can do. So content audits are absolutely essential. I always feel a little bit like I'm preaching to the choir when I say that, but I also know that most companies haven't done a content audit recently. Best practice is to do a content audit between 2 and 4 times a year. I am not going to ask anybody how often they do a content audit or when the last time they did a content audit was. We just did a content audit for the first time in a while for our website, and we reduced the amount of content in our content tree by 50%. It's helpful in finding the best performing pieces of content. It's helpful in helping you find those metrics that you might not expect for what you should promote and what you should build next. I believe in you. I know that you can do a content audit. I can also tell you that the hardest part is getting started. It's a very easy thing to kick to what I call the mythical phase 2, which never comes around. It's an easy thing to think, oh, we'll do that after the migration. Oh, we'll do that next quarter. Oh, we'll do that next fiscal year. By doing it now, it's kind of like cleaning out your closet. The more often you do it, the less work it's going to be every time you have to do it. Start from anywhere. As I said earlier in this presentation, you are probably already incorporating atomic content principles into your content creation process right now. It's probably already happening, it just doesn't have a name. Got a couple of tips up here for, again, how you can get started, keeping it simple, making sure that you're precise. Don't assume a reading order when you're creating that content. Figure that you're going to be pulling it out, lifting it out, and putting it in multiple places. And aim for future-proof. But overall, by keeping it simple, by keeping the customer at the center of the conversation, you can improve your content creation process, save your team money, and also save your team sanity, which is the most important thing. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it, and I'll be here if you have any questions. Bye.